I'll start this video off by asking a question that should never be put on the table. What can you do in the brass world with $15? 15 US dollars is not very much. And you could maybe find a couple used mouthpieces that are that cheap. I'm sure you'd be able to find something. Chinese mouthpieces are now probably about $5 a pop plus shipping. But with 15 US dollars, surprisingly, you can get an actual instrument. Well, call it an instrument if you'd like. It's really up to you here to decide. But for 15 US dollars shipped, you can have one of these babies, a Chinese-made Zebra brand cavalry style bugle. A few brief characteristics of this instrument. It plays in the key of C, albeit not very well. It's very poorly constructed. You can sort of feel that everything's a bit too loose. The solder joints are pretty bad. The finish is horrible. I plan on sanding the lacquer down on this. Well, again, it's one of those things where you could call it lacquer, but I don't think it really passes as that. It doesn't really get a passing grade in that department. And it didn't survive the trip very well. It didn't come in a case or anything, of course. I mean, it's 15 bucks. It came in a couple of turns of bubble wrap, and it's just littered with little dents all over the place. They're everywhere. Part of the bell's a little bit creased. That's nothing though. I've seen worse. If you guys remember Trent Hamilton's Bugle review, you'll be able to see that his didn't survive the trip quite as well. But yeah, it plays somewhat in the key of C. It doesn't do very well with this mouthpiece. Now, here's a bit of a letdown. This mouthpiece is not either a trumpet or cornet mouthpiece. It's this weird in-the-middle sort of shank that I've never seen before. Actually, perhaps it's a flugel shank. Why you would use a flugel mouthpiece on one of these, I'll never know. But that's not a trumpet shank, and it's not a cornet shank. What you can do is wrap some tape around a cornet mouthpiece and just plop it in for essentially the same effect. But yeah, I'm really not a fan of this mouthpiece. It is tiny. It's crazy small. The rim is practically non-existent. It's not as broad and flat as it is on some Bugle mouthpieces. I was sort of expecting that, and it's a little bit better in that regard, but it's definitely not my thing. What I would do if I were you and I purchased one of these is I would take, as I said, a cornet mouthpiece and wrap some duct tape around the bottom, like that. So I'll actually play it with each and let you sort of see what the intonation's like. With me today I have my handy little tuner here, and we're going to be comparing intonation and stuff like that on this mouthpiece and the one I would otherwise use for it. So let's actually set the tuner aside for a sec. This is what it sounds like. The notes are very hard to reach, and it's all very sharp. Even without a tuner, it takes the musical ear of a blacksmith to not be able to tell that it's out of tune. It's kind of horrific, especially on the G. That's about a quarter tone sharp, so that's real fun. I mean, what can you really expect? It sounds like it's got an air leak, and it really would not surprise me. It's a decent fit, but you can kind of tell that there's some wobble there. So that's great. It's also really hard to play. It's hard to hit notes, hard to lock them in. This is what it sounds like, in turn, with just the mouthpiece that came with my John Packer cornet. It's not the optimal size, but it's currently the only cornet mouthpiece I have that has tape around the bottom. Infinitely easier. It's a real glimpse of clarity when you put that thing on. I mean, it's not ideal. I wrap duct tape around the bottom of a cornet mouthpiece, and it works 10 times better than whatever the hell this is. That's just sort of what happens. And it's less sharp. and it's easier to hit notes. Now, interestingly, on both, despite the weird sort of specs of this instrument, the low C actually locks in quite well. I'm not saying it's not sharp, it's quite sharp, but the thing is, it actually locks in pretty well. And as you guys all know, I suck at low range right now, so it's kind of nice that this thing has a nice low C. So now we're going to take a tuner and see just how sharp we are. Now, I'm not sure how well this is going to work, how well you'd be able to see the little needle telling you just how sharp it is, but we'll give it a try. Yeah, that's basically what you get. It's not a G, it's a G sharp, and it's just really flat for a G sharp. So, as I was saying, it's a little over a quarter tone too sharp. You can sort of lip it into place with much difficulty, I guess. I don't know, I'm not good at lipping notes in tune right now, so it's not optimal. Everything's really sharp, basically, and the story doesn't change up high either. Looks like my tuner didn't really want to respond there. You know it's out of tune when the third of the harmonic series is more than a quarter tone sharp. Isn't the third supposed to be flat? But anyways, let's continue. You could make that a pretty nice G sharp with a little bit of practice, actually. It's that sharp. And then the high C is no different. It's right on the border between a C and a C sharp, but you come to expect those sorts of things. It's 15 bucks. So now we're going to take the John Packer mouthpiece and test sort of the same tuning properties and see what happens. So it's still quite sharp, probably 15-20 cents, but it's not as horrific as it was before. It's possible to play semi in tune. If we go higher, it's a similar story. Yeah, the high G is always going to be sharp. I don't think I can do much about that. And the high C is sharp, but really, it's a lot better than before. So what I'll do now is I'll play, I don't know, the Reveille or something on both mouthpieces and give you guys a little bit of a sound demo. Here's the terrible, awful provided mouthpiece. And here's the John Packer cornet mouthpiece. I'd like to say that it doesn't sound good on either, but you get much closer to sounding good with this mouthpiece than what it came with. And again, keep in mind that this is not the optimum for me. I would prefer this to be a 3C or larger, and I'm fairly sure this is closer to a 5 if not a 7. So the rim size isn't really ideal, and you know, there's other factors in a mouthpiece, and this ends up not really being my first choice, but even something like this works a lot better than the first one. The intervals are so much more free now. It's a lot nicer. What more can I say? I'll do the same thing now with the Semper Fidelis bugle call. You'll have to pardon the fact that it'll be transposed up a fifth. Sadly, this is not an F bugle, this is a C bugle. But here goes on the terrible, awful cornet, or provided weird flugelhorn shank mouthpiece. No, it's pretty bad. Again, it's not good by any means, but for a $15 instrument, it's not terrible. So it is definitely worth it to invest in a mouthpiece like this. I'd like to sort of point out the obvious here and say something that is probably true of all cheap instruments. Although, in my case with the E-flat trumpet and the C trumpet, I've sort of gotten lucky, I guess. But the bottom line is, this thing is filthy. Just filthy. There's a lot of this black residue sort of all over the place, or I guess gray. It looks like that's the sort of bootleg solder they used. You can see some where the joints are. I'm sure those joints will break within a couple months. And it's all scratched up here. There's some nasty stuff on the inside of the bell. I just took a rag and sort of went to town, and the rag basically came out black, so that's real fun. The tape on the bottom of the cornet mouthpiece is now blackened by the gunk inside the mouthpiece receiver. It's really not ideal. It's not at all. But that's what $15 gets you. You don't get the assurance of having a clean instrument, or a tuning slide, or a water key, or any of the things that would come with a bugle that you could buy for $50, $60. Does this work? Depending on your definition of working, maybe. At least if you stick a different mouthpiece on. Would I recommend this? If you've got $15 to spend and you really want just a not very good bugle, I suppose you could pick one of these up. But anyways, that was the Zebra brand sort of stencil bugle thing. Hope you enjoyed.